Welcome back to Autism Spectrum Resources for Marriage and Family. I'm your host, Dr. Stephanie C. Holmes, and I am excited to have as my guest Carrie Cariello.
Thank you.
Let me tell you a little bit about Carrie. She's the author of What Color is Monday? How Autism Changed One Family for the Better. And someone I'm with has autism. She lives in Southern New Hampshire with her husband Joe and their 5 children. Carrie is a regular contributor to the Huffington Post, Today Parents, and the Today Show. Parents.com, Love What Matters, and Grown and Flown. She has been interviewed by NBC Nightly News and has a TEDx talk, which I almost finished.
Yeah,
She speaks regularly about autism, marriage, and motherhood and writes a weekly blog on her website. One of her essays, I Know What Causes Autism, was featured as one of the Huffington Post's best of 2015. And her piece, I Know Why He Has Autism, was named one of the top blog posts of 2017 by the Today Show. And while this will air somewhat after the Converge Autism Summit, that is where we are at today, because Carrie presented on autism, life after high school. So, will you start us off with some of those important points that you led in your workshop?
absolutely. I would say that finding a post high school program for a kiddo like my son Jack is one of the things I'm most asked about. People are really hungry to understand how we started to launch him from his childhood home into a program where he could be successful. So I touched on a few things. One thing I talk to parents a lot about is the steps it takes early on to begin the steps towards independence, if you will. For example, we didn't even know it at the time, but Jack is one of 5 kids, the second oldest. And when they were around 10 or 11, we started to send him to a very low demand sleepaway camp with his brothers. It was a YMCA camp, just kind of run by big kids and play all day and do your thing. And just knowing that he could sleep away from our home was a huge, huge overcoming an obstacle in terms of knowing that he was ready to leave once he graduated high school. The second practical tip I like to give is when he was about 12, we had Jack start managing his own medication. A lot of these post high school programs will ask you about that. They don't necessarily want to take on kids who can't either organize their own medication, call for refills, or are not what's called medication compliant, where they agree to take it and they believe in the value of it. So if you can get your kiddo started on that when you know that it's safe for them to manage it, I highly encourage that.
So, tell us a little bit more about Jack.
Yeah, let me give you a little backstory to us in general. I'm married to a man named Joe. Joe's a dentist, and we have 5 kids together. My oldest son, Joseph, just turned 21. Jack is our second oldest. He's currently 19. He'll be 20 this spring. My middle son, Charlie's 18. The only girl is 16, my daughter, Rose. And then my youngest son, Henry, is 15. So Jack was diagnosed when he was 18 months old, which is pretty early. And I often tell people that the only thing I knew about autism back then was the movie Rain Man. I had watched it one afternoon with my mother while I was in high school, and I was intrigued and somewhat unnerved by it because I had no experience whatsoever with a different kind of brain wiring. So I kind of went into this diagnosis really naive to all of it. I often joke that my husband and I thought when we heard the diagnosis that Jack would outgrow it, that he would, we'll get the therapies that we need and we'll get everything in place and he'll start to talk and then he'll just sort of morph into a normal boy. And I often say naivete is our friend because if we had known the road ahead of us, I always say that about COVID too. If people knew that what the world was going to be like after the COVID shutdown, they would have lit it on fire. So sometimes the less you know is a little bit the better. Jack is 19 now. He stands 6'5". It's a size 14 shoe. And he currently lives in a residential program and takes 3 college classes. He is in a very scaffolded space, a lot of supports in terms of life coaching and social and emotional coaching, academic teams to kind of keep him moving towards baby steps of independence, which is very, very exciting. When I talk about what kind of autism does Jack have, that's often a question I get, and as you know, it's can be very hard to capture these dazzling people. Um, I would consider him high functioning if you use the definition of he can speak, write, and read, and has a basic level of life skill management. That being said, his chief vulnerabilities continue to be social connection. He's also diagnosed with severe anxiety and obsessive compulsive disorder. He is he's a really fascinating human being in that he has a incredible memory, as a lot of that population does, but at the same time very little working memory, so the ability to hold on to information while you complete tasks always gets in his way. um, Anxiety will continue to be a chief component of keeping him somewhat stuck, if you will. And he works daily to manage that sensation of impending doom and looping and fear about having either done something wrong in the past or something going very wrong in the future. So we work really hard to keep Jack in what we call the here and now.
Right. I often say sometimes with autism, sometimes that co-occurring issue, if it's anxiety or depression or ADHD, sometimes those things can be, far more disabling than the autism itself, especially the anxiety that keeps you on that loop. The OCD can be very difficult, very challenging.
100%. People will say or ask me, would you take his autism away if you could? And I don't always have a straightforward answer to that, other than to say, I really don't even know what autism on its own looks like anymore as a standalone diagnosis. He was diagnosed with anxiety when he was 6 years old, and it has clouded every move he makes ever since then. And our lives largely more revolve around the anxiety than they do the autism piece.
My daughter, who's 25, would say she wouldn't want to have her autism taken away, but she surely would love to be relieved of the anxiety piece. That feels way more debilitating than the autism and the neurodivergency and the way she sees the world and the way she can problem solve. And she loves all the things that she loves, her passionate interest, but it really is the anxiety that can be just tough on a daily basis. And there's like a little bit of anxiety that kind of comes with autism. And then there's like the in addition to exponent with a co-occurring diagnosis that makes it very, very hard.
And again, so he was 6, so we're talking 13 years ago. I had no idea that anxiety was what's called co-occurring, or back then the term was comorbid. And I write about comorbidity in terms of the relationship between autism and anxiety. And it's like, and it's such a dark word, right? Comorbid. It makes you think of death, and it's very dismal. And at the same time, it steals so much from his life. Anxiety does, that the comorbid label almost works. It doesn't, anxiety does not let him live fully.
What are some of the steps? Dr. Temple would be here agreeing with you that it's at about 12 or 13. We really want to start looking about those transition skills, right? Because our kids are, it's a developmental delay, difference, or disability. So we've got to start thinking way ahead of the game with very functional, independent skills. So, what were some of the steps? The first one was making sure he could manage his own medication. What were other steps you began to take to start baby stepping toward transition?
Yeah. So I just want to backtrack a little bit and say, like, dovetailing with this question is a question I get a lot about what services people should ask for at the IEP meetings. I get that from very young moms who are like, they're ready, right, to charge in and more therapy and more this, and that's all good. But when you're talking about a life skills approach, which my husband and I pivoted to when Jack was pretty young, life becomes more than the IEP table. You're trying to raise a whole child here, a whole human being. And that doesn't spring out of a sheaf of paperwork or a conference table. So we began to focus and be really mindful about these other skill sets that we thought were equally important: how to forgive somebody, how to cheer someone up after a bad day, how to change a light bulb, how to pack a suitcase. All of that began to be like the fabric of our everyday life. Constantly, I was searching for ways to stretch him. When his cousin had a baby, what can we buy for the baby? Even though he was like, babies don't play with things, you know? Any way that I could introduce boy to world and world to boy how to order for yourself in a restaurant. I title this portion of our, raising Jack is untethering. How to begin to disconnect yourself from a vulnerable child who needed you for so long, who you spoke for and fought for and thought about constantly. And I think it's three pronged. There's like a 3-point approach to that. There's the physical untethering. Can he sleep away from us? Can he make sure he takes his pills at night? Can he go on to the doctor's portal and order another refill for himself? Then there was a specific emotional untethering between he and I that really showed up once he began his college program. It became apparent that our frontal lobes, his and mine, were so deeply entwined that he really had trouble taking a step forward throughout his day without letting me know. And so that showed up as texts, 30 to 40 texts in a 2-hour span, like a really disruptive barrage of communication about what was for lunch and the latest pop culture and all these small details. And it became obvious to me that I had to begin setting some boundaries with him. We don't talk a lot about boundaries when we talk about raising special needs kids because there's an element of codependency that's very easy to slide into. And when this showed up for Jack in terms of the dependency on me, I became really determined in specific ways to untether him emotionally. I gave windows of time that I would be willing to answer texts. I used his older brother as a role model. Look, Joseph doesn't text me all day long about what movies are coming out. And just the other day, he's at his program nearly 2 years now. And I said to my husband, Joe, did you hear from Jack today? And he said, no, I didn't hear from Jack. And I said, neither did I. And that is a triumph in our world of autism that he is doing it for himself. The third prong to the untethering for me is sliding out between world and boy. I mentioned earlier, so often I was interpreting one to the other constantly. In specific practical ways, it looked like this. We were out to dinner one night and he ordered for himself. And when the food came, it wasn't what he ordered. And I had to physically force myself to sit back in my chair and physically force myself to fold my hands in my lap and say, I'm not going to solve this. And I had a pit in my stomach thinking, even at 19, is he going to get deregulated? What's this reaction? And he said, that's not the pizza I ordered. And I just forced myself to slow down a bit. And he said, all on his own, I'll try it. And if I don't like it, I'll order dessert. And so letting him come to these conclusions and problem solving tactics on his own has been really, really important in knowing that one day when I'm not here, which is a worry that circles the mind of every special needs parent, what will happen when I'm gone? I know he carries these skills with him.
You mentioned two things I'd love to circle back on because there is a fine line between that enabling and empowering.
Mm,
And when you have been, like you said, I love the word tethered and untethered. I'm going to probably start using that. You have been the voice for so long, but then you've got to think long term. You got to think beyond yourself. And it is really hard. I remember when we took our daughter across country and she got her first job and wanted to live in her own apartment. I felt like I was leaving my 5-year-old at kindergarten all again and was like, don't look back, don't look back. We're doing it. She's doing it. But it was so hard, but it's like this is exactly what we've been trying to get to is this level of independence. And so parents, we have to be so careful we don't slip into enabling because anything the child can do for themselves that we pick up on because we fear dysregulation or we don't want them to make a mistake, we're actually causing more of a disability than the
mm.
label itself.
Yeah. And science shows that kids like Jack, their nervous system only knows how to match the highest regulatory system in the room. So I often had to use that as a way to cope stress wise. Like you said, when you dropped her off, if she saw you be like, you have everything you need, what do you think we're gonna do? And what if this happens? And blah, blah, blah. Then she rises to meet you and has very little coping skills to bring herself back down. So that really aided me in making smoother transitions for him that he could enter into with a really calm energy system. But yeah, once Jack could master a skill, it was his to own, you know.
I usually tell parents, if you go up 1 degrees, they're actually going up like 5 degrees.
Tell me about
They're
it.
going faster than you are,
Yes. And
because
I,
they sense that there is part of their central nervous system is a survival mechanism. They have a higher need for that. They're in their survival part of their brain more often than we are. So they're spotting, like they can't read social cues, but they can read anxiety or danger, or if you don't think it's safe, is it safe? Mom doesn't think
right.
it's safe. It must not be safe.
And I live with a great big Italian man who runs at a 12. Joe runs hot. And for years I would watch them match each other and kind of like this game of cat and mouse with the nervous system, and finally I had to that's sort of one more piece of untethering, if you will. I'm going to remind myself that I said that. The fourth angle is taking myself out of their relationship. I often say MOM is manager of moods. I swear I'm going to get a t-shirt made of that. And for so long, I managed the two of them because I was convinced I was kind of the balm upon them. I was the one that was going to keep everybody calm and make sure that nobody overreacted to each other. And I would say Jack was about 12. And we had a really specific moment when I was like, I'm done being the safety net upon which they fall. And it, I realized I was standing in the way of this really beautiful, messy relationship and that they had to figure it out for themselves.
I want to dive deeper there because that is a very common thing. As women, moms, we tend to we want to keep pulling everybody in and come here, fix this relationship. We want everybody happy. We want harmony in the home. But sometimes with one of the parents and the child on the spectrum, just mood and temperament can be different. And so how did you take those steps to step back and let them have that relationship for themselves? And what was it like in the messy times?
It's still messy. Jack's almost 20. He knows how to poke my husband in ways he would never do with anybody else, if that makes sense. So I think the messiness is just a part of who they are. And probably if you looked at my relationship with Jack, you would see messy aspects too. But it was a really specific moment that Jack was referred out of district when he was in sixth grade. And ever since that point, he had a very hard time going to any of the other schools, the public schools, because he felt really embarrassed and emotional about it. There was one night we had to go for a talent show, and then we were going out to dinner afterwards. And in the middle of this girl's solo on top of, we're seated in this cafeteria and they're all on the stage and she's singing away to the Titanic theme song or something. And Jack didn't want to be there. And he got up and he said, F you to my husband. And my husband got up and steered him out of there quickly, so quickly that like a folding chair crashed, to the floor. And I was halfway out of my seat again. My body tells me everything I need to know. I was in fight or flight. I was going to race out after them. And let me be clear, I never worried Joe would hurt him. I just thought, let me just calm this all down. And in that moment, I was like, I'm so tired of this. I'm so tired of being in the middle because you know what? It never helped anything. It didn't help my marriage. It didn't help Jack and Joe learn how to relate to each other any better. And it didn't help Jack learn that his father has boundaries too that are not movable. So I sat back in my seat and I just stayed for the next few songs and I thought they will work it out. It was not the best time for whatever reason for the leader of the band, the teacher to get up and do a solo. Never as long as I live will I understand why she did that because it's like one more song to sit through. But when I went back outside and it was March and March in New England is, gray and cold and there was like a metallic rain coming down. And it was the two of them standing together, swaying with their arms around each other underneath. It was almost like out of a movie, like underneath this a parking lot light. And it was very poignant to me that they will find each other.
Well, you mentioned that, getting in the middle, it wasn't helping their relationship, but it wasn't helping you and Joe's
Mm-mm.
relationship. So you write about some of that with marriage. So what are some things you had to learn about your marriage and parenting a special needs child?
Well, I learned it too late, but I wish I learned so much sooner. Joe and I have been married 25 years now. And I always say kids magnify every flaw you have as a couple. And you put a special needs kid in there, and your whole foundation is exposed, every crack that you have, if you will. On top of that, learning to let Joe handle Jack and honor Joe for all the beautiful things he does differently. I read somewhere once that a mother's job is to keep her kids close in the nest, and the father's job is to nudge them out. And that's very consistent with my marriage. Joe is the first one to teach Jack how to pump gas. He took him to the bank every Saturday and taught him how to keep a ledger with a checkbook. All these, where to keep his wallet, how to walk in a crosswalk, like all those really big fundamental pieces of living a life. Marriage wise, practically speaking, we went to marriage counseling for probably almost a little over 2 years. And I really want to normalize that for couples in a sense that if you had a car whose muffler was dragging and you didn't know how to fix a car, you would bring it to a mechanic. Or and I don't say this just because Joe's a dentist, but if you had a toothache, you'd go see a dentist. So why wouldn't you go to somebody who has seen relationship after relationship, who is completely um, comfortable around the dynamic and trying to understand communication behavior? And we came out of that so much stronger. And then just recently, I talked about this the other day on a Facebook Live I did. There are 5 words I came to about 3 months ago. It's very new for me. Joe and I had been traveling with 3 teenagers. We got stuck overnight. We were stuck again in an airport. Joe always has his iPod in. And I was trying to have a conversation about what's next. Well, when we land, what we do, this and that. And he kind of bit back at me, right? Like, I'm trying to listen to this. And we were, in our pre-elevated moment. And I said to myself, this is just a moment. It's not who we are. It doesn't have to turn into a whole ordeal the way I often say, like a spill becomes a stain, like blossom into this big issue between us. This is just a moment. And that allowed me to really reset my own nervous system and kind of interrupt the reactive tendency that I have.
In some of the courses that I teach, we call that turning your relationship circuits back on.
Oh, I love that.
So the relationship circuits, according to Dr. Wilder, when they're off, we see the person as a problem to solve instead of the person I want to be with. They're
Oh,
now
wow.
a problem or a threat to solve. And that's how we know our relationship circuits are off because we're no longer relating or wanting to be in a relationship. We're treating them like the problem. So
Yes.
what you did was a great example for those who listen and follow when I talk about this all the time of taking that step back, getting yourself regulated and saying, let's look at the moment right now. He's was busy. I interrupted. This isn't a big deal. It's not going to ruin the trip. It's not going to ruin the rest of this time in the airport. And probably having a parent with special needs child, it's not worth upsetting Jack about either, right?
Right, because Jack is a catastrophizer, always worst case scenario. And we did argue, and Joe and I do argue. I think that's for us, it's a normal part, a healthy part of our relationship. But we are loud. And Jack always went straight to, you're getting a divorce. I know you're getting a divorce. Um, I also think that I like how you phrased that. I'm summarizing here, so I will do it terribly. But I read somewhere that we become our unresolved inner child in those moments. We resort to our 4-year-old self. He didn't listen to me. I'm not important to him. He doesn't love me. And I work hard to fast forward myself to the adult I am now with the skills that I have now to say, all right, let's just put this on the back burner right now.
Absolutely, because some of the things that trigger us, our marriage didn't install the buttons that I would say those buttons were installed somewhere else, usually in our childhood, and that's hitting an old wound, an old trigger, something else. And our brains want to tie things together sometimes that don't always go together because we're looking again for our brains want to solve the problem.
Right.
We got to come to some resolution. And usually what we want to do is, and who's to blame and whose fault is it? And that's really a hard
Yeah.
space to avoid going there because some things are just the way they are, and some moments are the way they are. And sometimes it's not a fault or a blame of either person.
No. And the best thing I think I took from counseling, I mean, we took so many things, but on the way out the door every week, and then it turned into every 2 weeks, and you tend to sort of like stretch time. Our counselor, this gentle older man, would say, "You love each other. You love each other." Like, what a wonderful opportunity to have that reminder on a regular basis.
And thankfully, I mean, you and I think are about in the same demographic. My oldest is 25. So I think even, a decade or two ago, there weren't even marriage and family therapists who understood the dynamic of having one or more special needs children. And thankfully, today, there are some marriage and family therapists or coach who can coach and give you that guidance because it was always frustrating, for someone to say, well, y'all just need a date night. I was like, man, who is watching my child?
Right.
A 12-year-old is not watching my child. Like, I need a specialist
Right.
involved, right? So sometimes some of the advice coming from a space of like, hey, I'm not trying to yes but you, but there are some things, there's some factors here you don't
Right.
understand. And so the good news is, when you're looking for therapists, I totally want to normalize that too, because I used to be a licensed professional counselor, is we all have times in our marriage or our personal life that we need someone else to speak into it and help us get out of it. And now, thankfully, there's so many more professionals who do know about special needs and special needs parenting and special needs marriages to help you even in your
Mhm.
niche that won't give you um, little quips
Right.
that aren't going to be helpful for your specific
That are
situation.
kind of boilerplate.
Right.
I mean, we were lucky to have a date night. We did start doing that, but I agree with you. We couldn't have just anybody. We had 5 kids, also very close together, so there was that dynamic. But yeah, Jack was a wanderer early on, or he um, had behaviors that we you couldn't just hand over to somebody, to the girl next door who's 16.
Absolutely. And it also means you might be paying a little bit more
Well, there is that. Yes.
because some people have family, extended family, and some people don't, right? We're just not as community based as we once were. So let's kind of go back then to the heart of your matter of the life after high school. So you started around 12 or 13, medication management. You and your husband both started teaching very functional skills, banking, where to keep your wallet, how to cross the crosswalk, probably social skills and all of that too. And then finding your program. So I'm sure that's a question you get a lot too, because A, there's not very many out there. And then B, fit is really important. So how did you go about what were the steps that you looked for and did in making this transition?
Yeah, it was a really tricky process. I do go into very detailed narrative about it over. I have a Substack page, and over there, I have a whole list of programs that we were looking at. So if anybody's interested specifically, I start. So didn't even see this for Jack, to be honest. We dropped his older brother off at college. And as we unpacked everything into the dorm room, Jack is a very tactile person. So I say he almost sees the world through his fingertips before he sees it with his eyes. So he walked around the dorm room and he was kind of tracing the windowsills with his fingers and tracing the bed frame. And I thought, he's really visualizing this for himself. For the first time, he could understand, what does a college campus look like? What does a dorm room look like? And community living look like? And it was after that, so that was in September of 2021, that I realized, oh, okay, maybe this is something on the horizon. I want to preface it by saying he was going into his senior year, which is quite late. Some educational consultants that I've since come in contact with suggest at least junior year, if not earlier, to start. I started really basically on a website called thinkcollege.net. It has a lot of ways to insert parameters for what you're looking for: distance from home, how much time the student will spend with a neurodiverse population versus a neurotypical population. Jack has communicated to us that he doesn't always want to be only with kids with autism. He likes like a more diversified um, group around him, sense of community. It also gave us ideas of, were the kids expected to finish a college degree? That was not necessarily our goal with Jack, a degree at the end of 4 to 5 years. It was giving him the experience of being on his own a little bit. So after we narrowed all of that down, we came back with 3 programs that would fit, 3 that would suit us within a 3-hour radius. Within each program is like 3 to 4 spots. It is very um, disproportionate to the typical college population. And I'm very open about this. They are incredibly expensive. The one where Jack goes is $80,000 out of pocket.
Wow.
And that does not include, he takes 3 college classes. It does not include tuition. I spent a lot of time with our state agency for vocational rehabilitation, making the argument that this is a kid worth investing in. My oldest son got $17,000 of merit money for breathing, for having a pulse. And it shows up every, quarter, whatever the allotment is. And my argument was, we have to front load Jack, right? If we have hope for long term success, these are the pivotal years to invest in him. And in a triumph that obviously to our family, but really to the larger community as a whole, they wound up giving us $35,000 towards this cost to help defray it. But once we started the application process, then right off the bat, we got you know, two no's that came. So that was really hard.
Well, that just lowered your options a
Yeah,
lot.
like a funnel squeezing, right? And then I kept thinking, what will I do with him? I think a lot of special needs parents with young adults can relate to this. It's very hard to keep Jack busy in a purposeful way. My weekends were spent like, okay, we'll bake now, and then we'll go to Target now, and then Joe takes him to the bank now. Jack doesn't drive. So he was always waiting for somebody to take him somewhere or planning a movie night. Very involved in a beautiful way, but also not a sustainable way for me. And when the no's started coming in, I kept thinking, what will this next year look like when at age 18, every service falls away? It comes to a complete halt. And luckily, our top choice, we got an acceptance letter, and he was thrilled. And so it's not an easy process. And I always encourage parents who are going through it to reach out to me because I know how overwhelming it can all be.